Hi there. I would like to talk today about the most common issues that I see when students are still in blocking and have kind of gotten ahead of themselves a little bit in some of the steps that they're going through. Where are some of the things that you should really be focusing on so that you are getting the most out of blocking as possible? The first thing, for the rig that we're using here, because we're not worried about anything that's going on with the face, it's best to make sure that all of the face is hidden. And for that, we can just click on our little gear icon, come into our visibility controls for the face, and we'll find them right here. So right now, the brow is still on. We'll want to turn that off, set that to 0, right? And the mouth is on. The way we get the mouth off, actually, is quite interesting. You need to turn the mouth cover visibility to on. And because this has already been keyed throughout here, these controls will need to be updated on probably every key. As you can see here, I'd have to go through and make sure that they're updated on every key. But if you set it that way before you begin, then that will be better. The next thing is to make sure that while you're still in blocking, before you've gotten it finalized, before somebody checks it off for you, keep all of the frames sequential. Do not try to time them out yet. You don't yet need to be looking at it as a timed animation, and it's actually a lot easier to just move back and forth through individual keys if they're right next to each other. So make sure they're on sequential keys. Eventually you'll have to pull them apart to insert new keys, but that's okay. It's a lot easier to do that and preserve what you already have if you haven't tried to time it out yet. If you get a character who's picking up or carrying something, then you want to make sure that that object, in this case this big cylinder back here, is parented to your character. Right now what we can see is that this object here, the load, is actually being keyed on every frame, which will make it extraordinarily difficult to animate as we try to put this into linear. So the better thing is for this to inherit its motion from one of the controllers on the character. What I'm going to do, just go in, I'm going to delete all the animation that's there. I'm just going to click on all those, right click, and choose rate connections. There we go. And now, obviously, if I move my character around, that is not going to come with him. However, what I can do is to go into the object that I want to parent to. And I'm going to parent to, in this case, the object that is most likely to be the thing that it's rotating around. That's the chest control. So I'm going to grab the chest control, then I'm going to shift click on the object, and I'm going to go into the rigging menu set. And we'll go to Constrain, Parent, Options. And under the options, just make sure that we reset our settings and ensure that Maintain Offset is on. That is important. All the rest there should be fine. I'll click Add. And now, as that character moves through there, that object will follow along without any additional animation needing to be applied to it. Now, when just going about posing one of these rigs, make sure that every time you are creating a pose, you are posing the entire body and not just a single arm or leg or something like that. Every part of the body should be rotated, even to a very slight degree. And for instance, one of the things that I see most commonly is if I had a character who was, standing in a pose, maybe one leg back a little bit. Right, it's not going to be a very good pose, but it will just do for the sake of demonstration. Okay, and they were going to bend over a little bit, so we'll bring that leg forward, and maybe they start to bend over here. What I often see is somebody just bending the chest forward and then sort of moving it forward like that. Maybe there's a little bit of rotation in the hips, right? And that's what I see. There's probably a little bit of extra motion there in X I didn't need. So, okay, well, that's okay, but it's not ideal. If I were to repeat this same kind of pose with my other character now, Dash, let's just kind of set up in a similar way. We put one foot forward, one foot back a little bit, rotate it out, and push this foot over a little bit. Okay, and as I rotate the hips now, I'm going to pull these down a little bit, get a little bit of a bend in the leg there. Okay, I'm going to start, instead of just going up to the chest and rotating that, I'm going to start in the hips. I'm going to start my rotation from there. And then I'm going to pay attention to these controls, these red kind of square-looking controls in the middle. And what these are the FK controls for the spine. And these all factor in to that part of the spine looking like it actually has rotation. And it should. And then once I've added in enough of that, I can then go in and rotate the chest. It's probably rotated a little bit more now than she was. But as you can see, turn off the controls, you can see that now I have a nice kind of rotation going on through the spine there, whereas over here, it's just really straight. So yes, technically you could go in and grab this control in the middle, which is the mid-IK control, and try to move that around a little bit. But I don't like that as much personally. I find it to be less accurate. I do like the control I get with these FK controls a bit more. And I also tend to think a lot more about how every part of the character is rotating. So if I wanted the hips to kind of like push the character over here a little bit more, and then I could think, okay, he's doing a lot there, but he's actually, as he gets higher here, he's starting to really rotate from the midsection a lot more. This is just a hypothetical pose. Okay. All right, so that really gets me to think about where those rotations are occurring, and it looks a lot better that way. Now they look like they're in some kind of, I don't know, yoga class or something. Okay, so those areas right there are really, really important. Another area that's really very important, if we go in and open up another one of these, another really important control that people often miss when they're posing is what happens with the arms. So when I rotate the arm up or down, the arm isn't just rotating from the shoulder, it's also going to be rotating from up here. If you try to raise your arm like this, you'll find that this section of your arm is also going to raise up, and that's called your clavicle. In order to properly move that, we have these controls here along the chest. If I rotate this control up, you'll see, hey, that's actually raising up the clavicle there. And that's what I want to have happen. In fact, generally speaking, I want to think about working down my arm, starting from not here at the shoulder control, but actually at the clav control. So I rotate those up, then I would rotate my arm, and then I would rotate everything else going down. So if you've already gone through and started animating your arms but haven't animated the clavicles, just go back and add them in. Quite simple, and they make a huge difference to the pose. You might have to adjust the arms a little bit because the clavicles might change things. If I got the character putting their arm way down as well, right, like that, maybe on both sides, and clavicles can also go down. That's going to make the character feel maybe, a lot sadder now, really stoop-shouldered. If I have the character rotating their arm forward, then this just is, this right here, like that, the clavicle is going to need to go forward as well. Okay, so that's really important. If the arm's going backwards, the clavicle goes backwards. Always pay attention to what the clavicles are doing. It makes such a huge difference to your animation. And if you feel that you're not getting enough control for whatever reason, and you still want to adjust a little bit more on the clav, then what you can do, after putting everything into this whatever spot you need it to go in, grab one of these controls up here, these little pyramid controls, and you can kind of move things around a little bit. If you especially need to reach more, or just change where some of the positioning is. So there you go. Make sure to use them. When you have a character who is walking around with a pose like this, we have to think about our staging. And with our staging, we always like to get this sense of there being a nice silhouette. I hit 7 on my keyboard right now, and there's no other lights in the scene, then we can see that the silhouette here is not as good as it could be. What we could do to help this out is to adjust some of these rotations a little bit. So I'm going to rotate the arm back a bit, and maybe I can rotate this down a little bit more. And the wrist, if I really wanted the wrist to be up where it was, I can maybe rotate that back up a bit. I'd get in there and probably look more closely at the pose just to see. Go back into 7. I'm almost getting it where I want. I want to see a little bit of negative space right here. So let's go back Try that again. I'm hitting, by the way, to turn on and off my controls, I'm just hitting Alt-1. Alt-1 turns on and off your NURBS controls. Alt-2 turns on and off your geometry. So that can actually be really useful, very easy shortcuts. So just a little bit of a change here. Also, the clavs haven't been included in this animation yet, I don't think, so let's just add them in. Just quickly pop over here to make it easier to grab them. So that makes a big difference as well. His arms down, the clavicle should be down. Oh, look at that. Look at how much negative space we get now. We can even rotate the arm back up a little bit more here. And that still now reads a heck of a lot better. All right. Now the other part here is that the staging of this arm on this side is not so good at this moment either. So let's go in and fix that. Pop over here again so I can grab that. Again, arms down, so grab the clavicle, rotate that down a little bit. Make sure I can see what's going on over here. Okay, that goes down, and the arm's coming forward, so pull that there a little bit more. Rotate this forward a little bit more. Maybe, unless he's holding on to something, he probably shouldn't have a fully straight arm. So let's give him a little bit of a bend there, and we give him a little bit more of a bend here in his wrist. Okay, bending it out this way because this helps to get a little bit better line of action. So I'm always trying to think about those things as well. Okay, so if I look at this now, you can see that that reads a heck of a lot better than it did before. Just very small tweaks, but being very conscious of what's going on with the character and how that's reading pose to pose. You can see in this example, this character is mostly on 2s. There's a few on 1s in between there. So this is kind of just that blocked out timing, or I should say blocked out lack of timing, actually. But what we want to really see is if we got to pose from here at this extreme to this extreme, we will definitely want to get, before you move on to the timing stage, make sure you put a breakdown between there. All right, and right now, you can see that that's set, this is in linear mode, which we don't want. So make sure that everything stays in stepped and clamped until you get to that stage. Otherwise, it can kind of give you a false sense of accomplishment, and it's not giving you enough control. As we look through the rest of these poses, you can see that for the most part here, we see breakdowns, right? And then there are some times where we see things that just start moving weird. For instance, right here, you got the foot that's starting to slide back here, even though the weight is all the way over it. There's also an awful lot of weight up front here, and it's taking a long time for that to come down. So there are a lot of poses that are probably not necessary there, and it's best to try to maximize what you get out of each key pose. All right, so this character's just got a few steps as he comes in. So we think about where are the keys in this case. So that's we can call that a key. That's sort of the initial pose. And then we get to something here where he looks down. I think this is another key right here. And then he has a pose where he's kind of doing this. I don't know if he's kicking something. And that would probably be another key. And then looks up. That's a key. Looks down. Probably another key there. So if we think about it, if we just try to get rid of everything that is not a key at the moment, and just for visualization purposes, I'm going to go through, pause the video, and delete everything that's not a key. Okay, so now we have just our keys. We got 6 of them. Start out here, get over to here, kick something, look up, look down, and then turn back around. As we're planning out what we want to do with our keys, we do constantly need to be aware of our line of action. So we can see that in this example here, our line of action is tending toward this direction here. So this is what we call a C shape. My terrible writing here. C shape. All right. So everything, when we have a shape like this, we want everything in that pose to support it. So we always ask ourselves, what can we do to better align the body toward that shape? And what we can do here, if I just delete everything again, is take a look at, you know, all the controls, how they are impacting on that overall shape. There is perhaps more of a sense of maybe weight we can build in there. You see, he's feeling pretty depressed, so it probably actually sits a bit lower in the body as it is. Just looking at, you know, where he's at with his rotation overall. You know, so we're starting to get more of that C there. And what I would also do is probably, you know, again, I'd go through and make sure to rotate all of those mid controls that I mentioned previously. But I also probably want to get the character to kind of like come forward a bit more here. Maybe even rotate a little bit more here. Have this arm rotate out a bit more like that. That's going to reinforce that pose there. It's already looking stronger. And it's always nice, you know, having him look down is fine, but it's nice to be able to see the face a little bit, even though we're not paying attention to what's going on in the face there. Right, it's always nice to be able to see it a little bit. Okay, that's the first pose. Now, when we get to the next pose, what we want is what I call rhythmic reversals, which means that if we had a C shape for our previous pose, like that, then what we want is a shape that's an inverse of that for the next pose. So an inverse C. So we're kind of trying to get this here. It's not exactly there yet. So let's just go through and see what we can do to get that. What I would do is I would probably rotate him back a bit more here. He's still kind of like hunched over. You gotta think, what could I do with this pose that maybe will allow him to remain hunched, but at the same time give us that shape. So what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm playing around with those mid controls ultimately. Right? So this is where these mid controls become really super helpful. So grabbing the wrong control there. That one. Right? And I could open up this arm a little bit more. Remember, I could play around with those clavicles to help things out as well. Could still be thinking about the staging here a little bit more. Okay, the head now, the head could rotate back over in this direction, maybe a bit more like this. Pull that all down there. We could play around with this arm to help it basically get more of this shape. But now you can see, now we have a shape here that overall is a better match to what, you know, better inverse to what we had here. So now we can definitely see those. And then the very next pose, what we'd want is for a C shape again. Now this pose has multiple things we have to consider. So in addition to getting the right C shape here, we also need to factor in the weight. Because right now, if we think about it, this character's center of mass is like right here. Right? That's where it normally is. But if we put this leg out like that, the center of mass has now gone probably like there, which means that somewhere down here is where all that gravity is sitting. And if the character puts their leg out over here, they're just going to fall over. So we don't want that. Even if the character's center of mass is where it normally was, it would still be unbalanced because the one foot that's on the ground is over here. So we don't want that either. So what we need to do is to go in and delete, not delete, go in and move our hips. So we move those over quite a bit. They're going to have to come over very far. And also, this was probably going to cause this foot to move in maybe this direction. That could possibly work. So the hips are going to be kind of trying to rotate in two directions at the same time. We have this one leg that's kind of sticking out here. I'm not sure that I'd want to have it at a full kick, but it depends. It depends on how the kick is going. I'm not sure what's actually being kicked here. Just thinking about what could work here. I'm just playing around with just some random controls, just try to get that line of action a little bit better, because honestly, if this character were kicking something, I would want to not just keep this arm in the pose that it is right now. I'd be really tempted to move this arm kind of up and out like that, right? So that that line of action just kind of flows out of here. That'd be much better. I could play around with how the arm bends and all that, and then this arm probably would do something else a little bit, differently as well. So there's a lot of things that could be played around with here to get that shape again, and that's going to be really nice. Now I have, if you think about it, each of these shapes now is a nice rhythmic reversal, and then this one here, of course, since we had a C shape that way, now we're going to want this to be, probably back here a bit more, rotating up, basically rotating in this direction. Even if they're looking up, that can still work if we've rotated it properly and rotate all these controls in the middle. So those are really important things. I'm spending a little bit of extra time here on rhythmic reversals because they are so vital. And they are what makes your animation look really cool. So if I was playing around with this arm, for instance, maybe just trying to keep it a little bit better in the silhouette. So if we just look at this in silhouette now, and we go back, right? So those are a lot better. In fact, actually, what I'm seeing here is that this pose really does. Originally it was kind of like this shape here, which is similar to this. So what I might want to do is try to find a way to create a pose in between here and here that has the inverse C, so that I can go back to this pose in more of the shape that it was originally, which was leaned back like this. In which case, that kind of makes a little bit more sense for that pose. I was pushing it just to try to make it work. But when I look at the pose that comes immediately after it, this makes sense for him to be leaned over here. So somewhere in between here and here, there should probably be another pose that really clearly inverts the C. Okay. So those are really important things to be thinking about with every one of your poses. And just to be really clear, these are your key poses. So I went through and I deleted a whole bunch of poses just for the sake of example. And those were extremes and breakdowns that had been created. But I'm only worried about the rhythmic reversals emerging on the key poses. They don't have to be on every sequential extreme and breakdown necessarily. And finally, with this pose here, I still can move this weight over a little bit more. It's still not quite as good as it could be. So I'm just going to grab my character, move the whole body over. I'll rotate this up here. Now, I'm rotating from the center here. And generally speaking, I only want to ever rotate just a single control here. The only there are 3 different hip controls here, and that can get really confusing. So you want to make sure that you choose one and you stick with it. I always recommend going with the cog control here, the big one. The only time that I would start using any of these other ones is if I can't get something with with this one that I want. Or in this case here maybe, where if I start to just rotate, let's start rotating this one. Let's see what happens. That rotates the hips there independently. Right? Notice how it doesn't affect anything above the hips. And then this one does kind of the same thing. They're layered, they're sort of stacked in there to provide additional levels of control. This one here, you can see actually it's rotating that control above there. And this one here, it's not. Right? So I might just use this one here if I really wanted to get these hips factored in a little bit better without disrupting anything else that's going on up here, then I might use those. Right? Remember to always animate the rest of your controls up here. So with that being said, this is a better pose now. What we're trying to do is make sure that the center of gravity is in a good spot. And it's a lot better placed now. It feels like it's sitting over this foot. Of course, always take a look, make sure it makes sense in all the views. That looks pretty okay. I might move the hips slightly forward here like that, just because the arm is kind of like sticking out in this direction, which is putting some of that weight back. So there you go. But all the decisions are being made from this one shot cam view. Here we have a character who's going about his sort of happy walk. But notice how each one of these keys for each one of these main steps is pretty much the same shape. So 48 and 16. They're pretty much duplicates of each other. So in a character walk, not a vanilla walk, but in a character walk, no two steps should ever be identical. They should not have the exact same timing, and there should always be a little bit of variance at the very least of what's happening in the pose. The hips are in a slightly different place, the arms haven't swung quite as much, the hands do something slightly different. Even if the character is trying to be perfect, they're still always going to be somewhat imperfect because that's just human movement, and we don't want to construct something that looks absolutely mechanical. So make sure you vary that up. Here's an example where there are just too many keys. You can see as we play through this that the action is getting lost because on many of these frames, only a single part of the body is moving. So we don't ever want to, in the blocking phase, have frames where we're only moving one part of the body. We can end up with this really odd kind of staccato movement, and it's a lot more difficult to clean up. So that's something that really needs to be, factored in. Keep your poses, keep the number of poses that you have as minimum as possible by maximizing how much you get out of every pose, like in the examples I was showing with the rhythmic reversals. In this animation here, we have a character who is walking through, gets scared, falls forward, and then has a little bit of a defiance there at the end. Looking pretty good, but we can play around with this a little bit more. If you notice, if I pop in here and just grab those controls, as the character comes up, and we look at it from both sides, we can see that it's almost nearly a mirrored pose. And we don't want there ever to be a mirrored pose because that's what we call twinning. Twinning is boring. It makes the character feel not as strong as they could be. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here so I can see things a bit better. What we can do here, this is, by the way, the pose here is not bad. It's actually quite nice. But what might be nicer is if I were to grab the leg back here, maybe do a little bit of a smart roll on it. So one of these legs might be bent. One or the other. Just decide on which one I think looks better. That one's gonna, if I do that, that one's gonna cover up the front one, so I don't think I want to do that. I might have to change the placement of this foot a little bit. But I can roll that up a little bit. Might maybe move it back a little bit, or even just really cause that smart roll to be quite big. The arm over here, I mean, we could twist out the character. Again, I'd start from these controls in here, twist them out a little bit. Maybe even rotate that like that a little bit more. All right. Good use of the clavicle here, but could we, she's balling out her fists like that. What would be nicer to help with the line of action here as well is if this fist were more rolled in like this. And this arm could even come out a little bit more. Right? So she is mad, but she's not perfectly twinned now. Right? Could play around with that a little bit more. It's not ideal yet, but it's coming along. And it's helping to break the pose up a little bit more than it was. Maybe she still wanted her head to be like looking over here. She could. All right, so it helps out a little bit better there. We also have to make sure, when you have big steps like this, you gotta make sure the character remains balanced in them. Because if they're off center of their where their center of mass is for too long, they just fall over. And so that's an important thing to keep track of. Okay. It's good work throughout this animation so far. Final thing I want to talk about is when you have a character taking a step. So for right now, what I have is a character in this first pose and then in this pose. And it's obvious that between those two poses, the character has moved both feet. However, if you just leave it like this and you don't include the breakdowns, then it's going to not animate well, and you're going to leave it up to Maya, and things are going to look poor. So you need to tell Maya how to transition between here. You need to tell it which foot to move first, and how to do that, how to put it back down, how to lift the next foot, etc. So to do that, let's just go in and grab all of our controls, hold down Shift, click on my frame 2, and I'm just going to move them down here to frame 3 for now. So what we should get in stepped and clamp mode is now that we're just holding frame 1 on frame 2 as well. All right, cool. I'm going to go in, I'm going to key everything. I'm just going to be very careful, make sure I've keyed everything everywhere. And now here at frame 2, what I need to decide is which foot moved first. I'm going to assume that, in fact, it was this foot that moves first. And you know what? Because I'm going to have 2 feet moving there, I'm going to need an extra key in between. So I'm going to have 2 keys in between this. So I'm just going to grab that again. So take what's at frame 3, just move that down. Okay. And so here, the first one, we're going to start out by saying, okay, if he's moving that foot, he's got to move the hips over the opposing leg, rotate them up, then lift the leg. Doesn't have to lift it very far. Maybe rotate the foot out a little bit. Starts to put it over in this general direction. Okay. The hips are going to have to rotate to kind of match that a little bit. See, how does that align with where the foot's going? It's not too bad, but it's a little bit too far, so we'd probably pull that back a little bit. You could do it from the top view as well. I'm just kind of doing it, eyeballing it from the bottom here. Not very professional the way I'm doing it, but that's okay. Gives me a start at least. All right, so that's giving me a bit of a sense of the step of him picking it up at least. And then where he puts it down, I might find that if I really wanted that foot to be in the same place, I would need to copy its location. So what we could do is grab the location of this foot right here. So let's grab that control there. Middle mouse click and drag back. Hit S to key that in. So you can see it's there. Okay. But here I'm probably going to maybe roll it up. Maybe that's the way he puts it down. He could either put it down that way or that way. I think he's going to put it down like that though. Okay. So rotate these hips around a little bit more. They can even out better now. This is kind of a wonky little step he's doing here. But that's okay. That makes more sense. And now here at frame 3, it's going to go in, I'm going to grab everybody and key them again. Now at frame 3, I can show this foot is fully flat on the ground. The weight has transitioned over this other leg now. Rotate that up. And he has lifted this foot, and he's bringing it over. I'm just going to match the foot's position here. Key that. Again, let's just go in and maybe have him in the process of putting it down. So now we can actually see that we understand fully how all of these motions work and transition. And we're not really left with any kind of lack of clarity about how the foot was moving. What we could still do is, if we wanted to, is to go in and add some breakdowns now between breaking down this motion from here to here. Does he pick up the foot, at all? So for instance, I could go in, make sure everybody's selected. I always like to constantly rekey everything just in the event that I've missed something. Can move that over a little bit there. Okay, so from here to here, in fact, grab this. I moved stuff, but I don't think I got everything when I did it. There we go. Grab everybody. Okay. So as he goes from here to here, right, I can think about how much of a transition is happening up here. There are some cool tools that I can use for this, in fact. There's a tool called the Tween Machine. And this is a script that you can download, and I'll show you. But what this will allow you to do is, if you put it between two values, essentially here, I say the first value will be what the hip's position is on frame 1, and the second value is the hip's position on frame 3, position, rotation, all that. If I come in here and say, let's bias it toward the hip's position on frame 3, then what it's going to do is it's going to kind of like go in and calculate kind of a nice in-between value based on the amount of, based on basically the amount that you're telling it right here. So 0 is basically right in between those two, the values at 1 and 3. If I put it to 50, positive 50 is going to bias it 50% more toward what the value of frame 3. If I put it at negative 50, it'll bias it negative 50% more to frame 1. So that's a nice way to kind of keep track of things. Also for the foot here too, this is something that I could use this for as well. Maybe I'll put that at like negative 20. But at the same time, I am thinking about how much is a foot raising here. So I probably wouldn't have a smart roll going on there at that point. I might have a regular rotation. Do I want the foot to kind of go up like that and come down? Maybe. Or do I want the foot to be down like that? This is where you make those decisions about how do you want to in-between things. So now I can really see that I've gone through and done a much better job of figuring out how this works. One of the values I didn't really pay attention to in this case was the pull vector, and the pull vector here, in fact I probably should have pulled that pull vector over quite a bit more before, but what I would probably do here is say, hey, let that leg be kind of controlled by this pull vector a little bit faster, so that's almost like the knee is leading. So that's another way you can look at it as well. All right, so really important. Hope that works into your workflow as well. Good luck.